Um, Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas on this Mid-Autumn Festival Day in 2021. We are going through Dao De Jing and we are on number 29. So I invite everybody to read their own translations, their favorite translations, and then we will discuss it. So who would like to go first? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to read a translation that you like. Okay, we'll start with Evanique.
Okay, so mine is from As God Sees Nature, God as Nature Sees God. And so chapter 29, do you want to own the world and improve it? I don't think you can. You see, the world is sacred. It can't be improved upon. If you try, you will ruin it. If you try to own it, you will lose it. Therefore, sometimes you must lead and sometimes you must follow. Sometimes you need to blow hard and sometimes you can breathe easily. Sometimes you must be strong and sometimes tender. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. Knowing this, the sage avoids extremes, extravagances, and exhaustion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is going to be Joe, David, Brian, Laura, and Krishna. Joe.
So I'm going to read Jia Fu Fang's, and it's actually very, very similar to Evanique's. So do you think you can take over the universe and improve it? I do not believe it can be done. The universe is sacred. You cannot improve it. If you try to change it, you will ruin it. If you try to hold it, you will lose it. So sometimes things are ahead and sometimes they are behind. Sometimes breathing is hard. Sometimes it comes easily. Sometimes there is strength and sometimes weaknesses. Sometimes one is up and sometimes down. Therefore, the sage avoids extremes, excesses, and complacency.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks. Next up is David Adelson. Oh, yeah. David, wait a minute. The other David, did you want to read? David?
It's okay. I'll be listening. I'm following. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David, go ahead.
Right, so this is Herman Ould. Those who attempt to seize all under heaven by force do not, in my experience, succeed. The world is a sacred vessel and cannot be so handled. Those who handle it spoil it. Those who grasp it lose it. For consider, there are creatures who go ahead and others who follow after. There are those who blow hot and others who blow cold. Some who feel strong when others feel weak. Some who mount the wagon while others fall off. Therefore, the sage avoids the excessive, the extravagant, the grandiose.
Thank you, David. Next up is going to be Brian, Laura, and Krishna. Brian.
Okay, again, this is from Kimura. Those who want to take control of the world by force can never succeed, for the world is a sacred vessel of dynamic energy, not meant to be controlled. Those who try to forcibly control it will ruin it. Those who try to forcibly keep it will lose it. Because life is not a static entity, but a dynamic process. Sometimes one moves ahead and sometimes follows behind. Sometimes one works hard and sometimes takes rest. Sometimes one grows strong and sometimes grows weak. Sometimes one is supported and sometimes is unsupported. Wherefore the sage, knowingly, moving with the dynamic flow of life, avoids extremes, avoids extravagance, and avoids excess.
Thank you, Brian. Next up is going to be Laura, Krishna, and Maritza. Laura.
This is Dyer. And do you think you can take over the universe and improve it? I do not believe it can be done. Everything under heaven is a sacred vessel and cannot be controlled. Trying to control it leads to ruin. Trying to grasp it, we lose. Allow your life to unfold naturally. Know that it is too a vessel of perfection. Just as you breathe in and breathe out, there is a time for being ahead and a time for being behind, a time for being in motion and a time for being at rest, a time for being vigorous and a time for being exhausted, a time for being safe and a time for being in danger. To the sage, all of life is a movement toward perfection. So what need has he for the excessiveness, the extravagant, or the extreme?
Well, thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Krishna, followed by Maritza. Krishna.
Okay, this is Lao Tzu by Red Pine. Trying to govern the world with force, I see this as not succeeding. The world is a spiritual thing. It can't be forced. To force it is to harm it. To control it is to lose it. Sometimes things lead, sometimes they follow. Sometimes they flow, sometimes they flow hot, sometimes they flow cold. Sometimes they expand and sometimes they collapse. Sages, therefore, avoid extremes, avoid extravagance, avoid excess. And then he quotes 12 sages who did exegesis on this poem. And at the end, he says how he did his translation. So it goes on for a couple of pages.
Thank you. Next up is Maritza.
I'm going to read from Antonio Rivas again. It's my favorite Spanish translator for the...
Can you read in Spanish first and then in English?
Yes, I can. So this one is called ceguera, and ceguera is blindness. Aquellos que desean cambiar el mundo de acuerdo con sus deseos nunca tienen éxito. Al mundo le da forma el Dao. No puede darse forma a sí mismo. Si alguien intenta darle forma, le daña. Si alguien intenta poseerle, le pierde. Así pues, a veces las cosas florecen, a veces no. A veces la vida es dura, a veces es fácil. A veces la gente es fuerte, a veces es débil. A veces llegas a donde quieres ir. A veces te quedas en el camino. Por ello, el sabio no es extremo, extravagante o complaciente. Blindness. Those who desire to change the world according to their desires never find success. The world is formed by the Tao. It cannot form itself. If anyone attempts to give it form, they are destroyed. If anyone intends to possess it, they lose. And so, sometimes things flourish, sometimes not. Sometimes life is hard, sometimes it is easy. Sometimes the populace is strong, sometimes it is weak. Sometimes you arrive where you wish to go. Sometimes you remain on the path or on the walkway. Because of this, the sage is not extreme, extravagant, or complacent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marisa. Next up is going to be Jason.
Okay, yeah, let me share my screen. Okay, I think here I have a few parts I disagree with most of the translation because I be a little bit picky. The first line, I do not see it as possible to want to conquer the world, let alone try to control it. I think everybody do the same thing. And I just like to remind everybody that 29, 30, 31, that's all related to the military. Okay, so next one and the next week, you will see that's all related to the military advice. Okay, so the world is a spiritual being. No one can control it. Those who try to control it will fail. Those who grasp at it will lose it. And I think the key word here, the sun, okay, I think most of translation consider as a sacred thing, sacred vessel, or holy grail, something this kind of concept. But I think in Lao Tzu, the sun, this word used a couple times, usually means spiritual. And so that means, that's why you cannot hold it, you cannot control it, because it's formless, it's spiritual, so you cannot control it. I think that's the logic behind. So that's why the first thing I was against the most of the translator. I think it's only Krishna's translation translates a spiritual thing, and the rest all translates a sacred vessel. Okay, so that's going on. Therefore, I think a lot of text doesn't have have this line. So I just added, but it's probably not that important. The sage has never tried to control it, so he will never fail. He has never grasped it, so he has never lost it. So basically just repeat. And some version has it, some don't have it. So I think that's fine. Okay, this one is a big thing, I think. Okay, so that's the way I translate. I think I like to think about this. The last line we talk about the sage will avoid extreme. Okay, I think most of translation is, but this one you talk about the reason why you have to avoid translation, avoid the extreme. Okay, so if we put this one in translation, so you talk about strong, weak, below strong, below hard, below weak. That's opposite. So based on this, why the sage want to avoid extreme? So I think the translation, that's why I disagree. Because the reason is you cannot tell what people's action, okay? Not because opposite, because you cannot tell. So that's the way I translate. Whether people are truly moved by leading or following. You lead or you follow, you cannot tell. You only see people moving. They can be leading or can be following. You don't know, okay? Whether they breathe from their nose or from their mouth, okay? Same thing, I think based on this word, she, okay? The original means you blow from nose. And this word, chui, means blow from mouth. So basically you cannot tell, okay? The people blow from the nose or from the mouth. I think that's the reason. Okay, or then next one, whether the body is truly powerful or weak. Okay, so this one is powerful. And this word, yin, means it's not using the physical weak. That means kind of sick, this kind of weak. So you cannot tell it's powerful or weak, okay? And that's the amount help, okay? So whether a building is destroyed by its own dilapidation or by the outside force. So basically it's talking about the building or castle, it corrupt, okay, by the outside force or by itself, okay? So Lao Tzu is using this one as a metaphor, telling you a lot of things you cannot tell. What's the reason, what's going on? Therefore, for this reason, the sage will avoid extreme. Okay, so here I be a little bit picky here. They have 3 words. Okay, so if you want to translate, probably just means avoid extreme, avoid extreme, avoid extreme. There's a 3 kinds of extreme. But I think these 3 kinds of things, the first one means the depth, like a abyss is very deep. Okay. This one means that means very wide, overexpanse. Okay, that's used as a bad word, okay, in today's language. And this word called Tai. That's a good word, okay, in most of time. If you read I Ching, the book of change, there's a lot of words like this. That means good. Okay, so why you want to avoid this one? The origin meaning, this word means very high. Okay, so I think the meaning is to avoid extreme in the depth, which means in ethic or your daily life. Okay, the wide, okay, over expense, that means on the material side, and on the height, which use have a political sense, also avoid extreme in politics. So that's the way I think that will make sense, logical sense on the whole paragraph. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. All right. So now we can either move to, so I'm going to go to David S. And David, you're welcome to read a translation, or you can talk about what you got from this verse.
I want to ask maybe an opinion from Jason.
Go ahead.
About something that you just said, Jason. So in the next to last paragraph, which I don't see yours up there anymore, but I think all of our readings had some similar notion. But your translation specifically said you can't tell who's leading, who's following, whether you're breathing in through the mouth or through the nose. Is this suggesting to you that those are just appearances, just interpretations, that neither is actually true? It's not that they're breathing through the mouth or through the nose, but there's a sort of, the body is healthy or not healthy. It's really not a difference, that there's just a process. It's just saying these are illusory, or that there is a truth and you can't get to it. You know, how mystical is what you are pulling out of this? Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. And the basics, it's the author is trying to tell the ruler or the government officer, right? So you don't know he's following or he's doing this or doing that. You don't know. So you avoid the extreme, okay? And basically you ask you to do so-called wu wei, no action. I think that's the whole action, a whole advice in the whole book. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Like sometimes I'll just finish real fast. So it's like we say, you know, there's the ends but they're the causes. Well, but you first conceive an end to see something as a cause. So there's sort of, which comes first, seeing the causes or seeing the ends, and there's that kind of dynamic. Is this a similar kind of thinking about why things or how things are actually happening?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you. So folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark to talk about what did you get from number 29. What are your observations? We're going to start with Claudio, followed by Evanique. Claudio, what did you get from number 29?
Yes, I don't disagree with Jason. I got something different, but that's how difficult it is. We all interpret it. Yeah, what I got for number 29, let's say the first sentence or the first, he wants to take the world and act on it. Will he not be able to achieve it? I know. So who is he referring to? The author, right? He was living in the time of the warring states, probably the rulers, perhaps the military leaders, people who want to dominate the earth. I don't think, maybe he's not referring to the entire universe, because back then, how could they go beyond the heavens? So everything below the heavens. So he's probably referring to the earth. But Jason said it's spiritual. So it could be everything, the entire universe. I'm not sure. It's very obscure. And either lead or follow, either whistle or blow. So things are this way. Jason says that because it's difficult to distinguish what a person is doing. Either one, there's two extremes, right? I agree with that. Also, maybe this is the natural order, right, of events, right? So this natural order, the fact also that you can't tell what they're doing, we should not disrupt it. We should not interfere with this these natural events and natural order. And the sacredness aspect of this, because the world is sacred, we cannot change it. Perhaps Jason is right. I agree that it's something that you cannot, it's formless. Like I remember in chapter 25, the Tao was described as something formless, standing alone, undergoing no change. So it's sacred in that way, and it would be difficult to grasp or to dominate or to change in any way. Also, because the earth, perhaps if he's referring to the earth, it gets its laws from the heavens, and the Tao is right at the top. It's the mother. We learned from chapter 25, it's the mother of all existence, all of its constituents, including the earth and man. So in that way, the earth is sacred that way, right? Yeah, it's very difficult. Jace, that's what I got.
Thank you. Next up is Evanik, followed by Joe. Evanik.
Can I respond to Claudia?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the one thing I like to make it, I almost very insist, okay? So they use the under the heaven, okay? So I think under the heaven, a lot of, it doesn't mean the entire universe. That means the world, okay? And the world means the China at that time, because that's the warring state. So, so I think that's the political sense of the world. They have another sense of heaven and the earth. That's the natural sense. That means the world, the natural world. And if under the heaven, that means the political heaven. So at that time, a lot of feudal lords, they are fighting each other, try to unite the country. So I think that's the point they are talking about. When they talk about the under the world, under the heaven is spiritual being. So that means this one, that's why I disagree. It's a sacred. They talk about it's a formless, spiritual. You cannot hold it. You cannot control it. I think that's his point. Yeah, that's I like to make it clear.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Next up is Evanik, followed by Joe. Evanik.
Yeah, so what I got from 29 is one is to control yourself and not life itself. And what I got is balance, because I think when it says when you try to control the world, I don't think you can. I think that's what we all try to do in a sense, or people try to do. Like I took it more like we want to control it, and then when we can't, we're unhappy about that. Or if things just don't turn out the way we think they should, we become unhappy. So it's just like that balance and not trying to control anything, but how you react to what is happening at that moment. I think what Jason said is the line, it is impossible to predict and control people and the world. I think that's so true, and it meant a lot, because a lot of times we try to control people by either impressing them, forcing them, or manipulating them. And none of that really controls them. It may control their actions, but it doesn't control them or how that way they feel about you or their feelings towards you. You can't control that. And I think that's ultimately what people try to do. They try to control their like people's feelings towards them, or, this is just in the general sense. I think more in a military sense, I think people try to control the way they see a country. Like a country wants to be seen as powerful, but really what you're being seen as is a dictator. Like, especially when you're trying to take over another country, what you're really being seen as is an invader and evil, and you're trying to make yourself look good. Just one more thing. I think in Ecclesiastes, it talks about this very particular thing in the first chapter. Not going to read the whole thing. There's a part that says all streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, they return again. It's like you can't control what these things does. And even like in tragedies like in Katrina, for instance, when the hurricanes happened, they were trying to control the dams and the dams broke. Like you can't control nature ultimately. And that's what we try to do. We try to dominate. And I think we just can't. If you just be, I think you're a more peaceful person, or you're more at peace because you can control what you do. So that's what I got.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Joe, Maritza, Charlie, and Laura. Joe.
Yeah, I'm just going to be very brief because I think that there is a feeling the idea of giving up control is the main theme here. But what does that exactly then entail? That means, suspending your own personal judgments and what you think of a situation, maybe even not being critical. And then the idea that you're looking at things the way they are and accepting them for the way they are, which is actually very similar to being like water and being like the elements, and accepting things for where they are as opposed to trying to change them. And that's an important distinction to make, because every time you try to change them, you're changing them based on your perspective, not necessarily what nature would then have. There's also the section that in my particular, the poem that I read, where there are, that sometimes you're ahead and sometimes where you're behind, or sometimes it's hard to breathe and sometimes it's easy. It's a reminder that this too shall pass, that these things that we're going through are transient, just as our life is transient. And as far as avoiding extremes in complacency, again, I view that being like water, being adaptable to the situation as opposed to trying then to control the situation. I see that soon as you try and control a situation, you can lose some of your ethical principles. You start to compromise and rationalize a lot of your actions, which actually may be in contrast to nature. So it also makes you essentially, when you're trying to control something, you end up compromising yourself in some way, shape, or form, as opposed to accepting things. There's just some initial thoughts. I actually have some other thoughts.
Sure, you can go ahead and come back later.
Yeah.
Thank you. Folks, if you would like to comment, okay, very good. Thank you. Next up is going to be Maritza, Charlie, Laura, Max, and Steve. Maritza.
So looking at this poem, to me, I really look at it as an admonition for us to remember that we're supposed to be flowing like water and not trying to force anything in either direction. In the one that I read, the title is called Blindness. And that kind of gave me pause when I was reading it, because I think what it's saying here in this translation is the idea that the more we look in one direction, the more blind we're going to be to all the other directions, and that is not a desired position to find oneself in. And as such, it's the specifically the one I read, and I think several of the others that were read, it gives us this idea of, sometimes it's going to go this way, sometimes it's going to go the other way. And the overall feeling that all of the translations are saying to us is that it's not really going to happen because you willed it to happen. It is just going to happen, and you're going to be, an innocent bystander, or you're going to be, dragged along in whatever direction is decided, or it's going to happen. So I kind of do see this as a call for us to remember to flow like water and to kind of do all things with moderation so that we don't find ourselves stuck in a corner.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is going to be Charlie, Laura, Max, Steve, and Jade. Charlie.
Yeah, when I try to understand something, I first try to understand the context from which it came. And as I understand it, so I'm not really so much saying that this is my way of seeing it, but is my attempt at trying to see it, okay? Because I'm not sufficiently well informed about this period of history, the Warring States period. But what I do know is that there were many individuals who had a lot of power and they had their armies and so on, and that violence was rampant, and that they were constantly after each other. And so this was an environment where, well, first of all, anybody should be able to see that violence begets violence, and that there's a tendency to want to get revenge. And so in that kind of an environment, a wise person would not want to provoke people without a really good cause, okay? Not simply because of revenge or something, you know, shallow like that. So that I'm struggling. I think that this is a way to, for me that seems like a plausible way to understand it. This developed within a situation where there was no established order. There was no generally agreed upon who should be in charge. So it wasn't a question of an established order and a revolutionary, but it was, you know, everybody was just, you know, going crazy. And so that, you know, what do you do in a situation like that? You know, and so it's the advice to, you know, to not engage in unnecessary provocation, to basically let things go as much as you can. And but anyway, that's kind of what I'm kind of struggling to see it in that sort of a way, because that seems to be the context in which the Dao De Jing was written. And so anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charlie, for bringing that in. Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Max. Laura.
Okay, I've read this a couple of times, and this last time I had this feeling that he's sort of annoyed in some way. He's kind of going over everything he's already talked about, and he's kind of having to remind people about it once again, how they need to think and feel and behave. And I think that that's what I'm feeling after reading it like that. And it's not in a punishing way, but it's just like, I have a feeling that he's saying, I'm tired of going through this over and over and over again with you, and listen carefully now. And that's my impression of this poem this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Max, Steve, and Jade. Max.
Thank you. I will be brief. I think that's my first time to join this particular call. The historic perspective is very helpful. Thank you, everybody. I did not take that into consideration at all. However, I don't know that I'll just share what it meant for me personally. And I think even with historic consideration, I'm still leaning that way. This verse 29 for me meant that universe is already all complete and perfect. It really is talking to me, when it is talking to me, finding my own equanimity with myself and with external world around me, and not trying to impose myself, but rather let once I find my equanimity, flow with the external world outside. And another big thing that I took away from 29 is that, like with everything else in life, when we try to hold on to things, then we end up losing them, as opposed to letting them be free. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Max, and welcome to Dao De Jing. Really appreciate your contributions. Next up is going to be Steve, followed by Jade. Steve.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Okay, so, you know, I agree with what most of people are saying, and, you know, that's the general impression always of this book that, you know, I've read many times through my years, but, you know, that it's sort of reminding us that we need just as much in the West here. You know, I think we've even gone worse than the Chinese history, you know, in terms of needing this lesson. Really, but you know, so there's reminding us, you know, that the soft, gentle, the considerate, the feminine can be just as important and even superior to the masculine, forceful, violent, you know, all that thing. Absolutely. With this passage here, I'm still seeing there's another element here too, and that is that, like he does say, you know, there's a time to grow in strength as well as decay, and there's a time to be up as well as to be down. So although, you know, like the Chinese, we too need very much to be reminded of the importance of the feminine and the non-violent, absolutely. And that, you know, you know, even in our workplaces, when we have a manager who's just on a power trip, usually that does not last very long. You know, we know that he gets into trouble, or she, very, very quickly, right? It's just like a law of nature, right? The other humans don't stand for it for too long, right? But at the same time, you know, I'm just in the last line, let's avoid extremes, and maybe avoiding sometimes non-passivity too, because sometimes we do have to act. This is, I'm seeing a little bit different. Anyway, that's all I had to say.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. Great comments, Steve. Next up is going to be Jason, Amon, and Jade. Jason.
Yeah, I just like to make a quick a comment. I'm very surprised, except Steve, and probably nobody mentioned about the last night, to avoid extreme. And to me, that's avoid extreme is the key message. That's just my opinion. I'm a little bit surprised. And the words he used, not only do the extremely bad, also extreme good. Okay, also avoid, like high, the last words, that means high. So I'm a little bit surprised, you know, and I would like to hear about this. You know, thank you.
So were you agreeing with what I said or disagreeing?
Oh, yeah, no, that's nothing agree or disagree. Oh. That's our own impression, okay. Right? And then I think the last line is important, and I'm a little bit surprised not a lot of people talk about avoid extreme.
Okay.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Amon.
I do feel like I skipped the line, but Jason kind of stole my thunder almost right out from under me. And I think Steve did a little bit too, because yeah, I think the admonition to avoid extremes, one of the translations I'm looking at, I like where it says, the sage rejects extremes, rejects excess, rejects excellence. 3 versions of the same thing, but with slightly different tones and connotations. But I'm always taken when I read this passage, and especially when I read through Jason's translation of it, of this idea of the impossibility to know what motivates. You can't know if someone is leading or following. You can't know whether their breath comes from their nose or their mouth, especially if you picture a soldier on the battlefield huffing. We don't know which way they're breathing, and we don't know if they're truly powerful or truly weak. That gets found out on a battlefield. But that last example of a house collapsing under its own dilapidation or the power of external force, all of these are net same result. The manifestation in the world around us, we see the net same result each time. There's something a little bit deeper, and it ties back into that notion of not just do this, but you can't do this. You cannot control the world. You cannot account for every single variable. And it's hubris to try. You will not know if your soldier is huffing from their nose or their mouth. You won't know if they're truly strong or weak, if they, succeed or die in battle. They could have gotten lucky. They could have been killed by a stupid arrow that just happened to hit them. You can't know if you constructed a perfect home and the force of an earthquake was just enough to cause it to fall, or if there was some fatal flaw in it and a couple of Richter degrees down, it'd be less. So this idea that it is impossible to control the world, that's where that humility needs to come from, and to avoid excess, excellence, extremes of any kind is more in telling the young princeling, yeah, you may have all these great plans, but bear in mind, the world will have its plans too. The Tao has its plans, and its plans win. You need to learn to accept that. You need to account for that. You need to have that degree of humility to tolerate disappointments and not be so enchanted by your own successes. I think that's really what the soul of this chapter is about: humility, true and genuine humility.
Amon, that was just wonderful. I think that's a great way of capturing the whole chapter. Thank you. Jade, welcome back. Great to see you back. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good to be back. So the thing for me is the Tao is very abstract. And I feel like abstract concepts just get ping pong upon more abstract concepts, even when we dissect it. So I'm going to take a risk and give a concrete example, because I think that's the thing I love about Star Wars. I like Yoda because he's basically explaining a lot of these concepts, but he points to it in the world. So you get a sense, because like I feel like the Tao is a lot of sense. It's like sensing what it is. And it's hard to sense something without seeing it. It's like saying, you know, two people are in love. You can say it, but if you've never seen two people in love, you wouldn't really understand what someone is talking about. You understand when you observe it. And so it's like, I think the easiest example, I have like 3 of them. I'll give one. My yard, leaves fall down. Humans wanting to control yards. I am given dirt for my garden every single year, just from those leaves falling. But the neighborhood's desire to control the aesthetic of the neighborhood on some level forces us to not have free dirt. We go and we buy dirt, and then we complain about economics. Like the way that we do things is that we have the world, the universe, however we want to put it, even if we're just going to have it China or our municipality, the world has come designed to give us what we need. But we decide, no, we're going to do it like this. And we get in the way of the world doing what it needs to do. So instead of allowing, you know, the leaves to stay there, the worms to even come up through concrete in New York City and turn that over into perfectly good compost, I put those leaves in a bag and send them to the dump. And then I go to Home Depot and I buy dirt that doesn't even have the nutrients. So then I have to go and I have to buy fertilizer. Talk about control, not resulting in the best product. So it's like, I don't know, man. This is the way we live.
Jade, that was wonderful. And what I'll do is that I'll have a couple of people talk, and then I'll come back to you for your second example. This example was so good that we'll have the seconds, but I'm going to have other people talk, and then we'll come back. Next up is David and Joe. David.
Okay, Jade, maybe mute. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, this 29 left open a possibility for me, which isn't, it's sort of lurking here. And since I haven't been keeping up with everything that has been read up to this point today, but for me, this leaves open a possibility as it talks about avoiding the extremes. So it's saying these sorts of attitudes and actions are not compatible with something I'm trying to show you. So it's not, and this has sort of been said, this is not a complete embrace of any passivity. It's not telling you how to act, but saying, maybe don't do this and don't do this. These extremes aren't working. So I like this analogy of viewing the world, the universe as water, and ourselves in that water. So as we're a wave in relation to the ocean. And so we're seen on the surface, but a wave isn't just the thing on the surface, right? It's the entire creation of that thing in the surface, and all the pressure below it and everything. So the wave is part, it can't comprehend the ocean. We're just a wave in the ocean. We can't surround and control the ocean, right? But we're already in it and part of its force and change. So I see that this is talking about not being completely passive. So we're these mere waves, and this is a part of the lesson. So we can, as waves, have some impact. We are having an impact. So let's say extremism is not, as we're being told, a realism. That's not something you can turn yourself into the control of the entire ocean. But we're going to learn what is it to be a sage. We're facing the world in a way to be sagacious, is to be in a realistic balance to our ocean and knowing what we are and what we can be, and that affects the ocean, right? So it's not the same as being inconsequential. And you know, that's sort of what it's telling me as a secondary lesson.
Thank you, David. I'm going to read the poem one more time from Ursula Le Guin. I'm going to start with her commentary on it, a short paragraph. She says, for Lao Tzu, moderation in all things isn't just a bit of safe practical advice. To lose the sense of sacredness of the world is a mortal loss. To endure our world by excesses of greed and ingenuity is to endanger our own sacredness. And this is her translation. She titles it, Not Doing. I thought Amon did a fantastic job of capturing the heart of this. So she has 3 paragraphs. First, those who think to win the world by doing something to it, I see them come to grief. For the world is a sacred object. Nothing is to be done to it. To do anything to it is to damage it. To seize it is to lose it. Under heaven, some things lead, some follow. Some blow hot, some cold. Some are strong, some weak. Some are fulfilled, some fail. So the wise soul keeps away from the extremes, excess, and extravagance. Next up is Joe, followed by Charlie. Joe.
Yeah, just really briefly, and I was actually looking at the Ursula Le Guin interpretation of this. And ultimately, one of the things that if you're living in extremes or and doing anything in excess, the one thing that is true is that it's not sustainable. And so that is where I see the idea of the Tao, as Amon had said, has its own plans and it will prevail. Because whatever you're doing in excess, you will eventually end up weaker. So that this is something that it's a warning more than anything else, as I see in addition to everything else. It's to live in accordance with the way, but it's ultimately about sustainability as well, your own personal sustainability. And controlling everything is obviously something that is not sustainable in its own right.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Charlie, followed by Jade for her second example. Charlie.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what I had said before. The more I think about it, the more it seems like a worthwhile way of looking at it. I don't know how many of you have seen the TV show I, Claudius with Derek Jacobi, where he played a Roman emperor. And basically how he survived was by not provoking people, by not being a threat. And so when you're in a situation where a large number of people are players with a very cutthroat mentality, okay, it's probably not a good idea to go in there and antagonize them because then you will be seen as a threat and they will respond to you in kind. And so, but sometimes you have to, you know, I mean, if you're backed against the wall, if you don't, then like Ursula Le Guin was saying, you sacrifice the sacred and that's not any place to be going. And so it's kind of how being able to deal with a world where so many people are crazy about having complete power. They want to be the number one, want to be the number one guy and rule everybody. And so if you got a whole bunch of people thinking like that, it's not a good idea to be excessive or extreme, or even, as Jason was pointing out, what was the word? Tie, I believe, excessive good or something like that. That would be seen as a sign of weakness, and there you could get you trampled real quick. Anyway, that's.
Thank you, Charlie. Jade, can we have the second example, please?
Yeah. The second example.
Jade, could you speak into the mic?
Is that a little better?
Much better.
Okay, so the second example is kind of not quite as clear in my mind, but I'll do the best I can. It's more like with children. So the concept of how I feel as though in modern day world, a good parent is a good parent based on the product of their child. So if the child is XYZ, able to produce XYZ, the parent is a good parent. So that means that the parent must do a lot of controlling over what the child does, how the child is. So it's like the difference between letting a child go out and just have unstructured time for 4 hours after school, as long as they get their homework done, versus putting them in violin, soccer, cheer, and other things, because you want this child to become a specific something. So, and sometimes the result does end up in them being a specific something, and sometimes it doesn't. So it's not a clear-cut example, but I think, again, that moment of control of, how much control do you put in? And I think a lot of the emphasis that we've had right now is on controlling other human beings. And this starts from the day one when a child is born. Every decision that a parent, a teacher, society makes with these children, even the dance classes you send them to, is to mold them into something specific. And there's not much time given to children to just become whatever it is that they are, quote unquote, destined. We don't allow destiny to decide who we are anymore. We decide, and we decide for others.
Excellent point, Jade. My friend Rupali does a series. She's done a series of meetups on Montessori, and the idea.
I was a Montessori kid. That's also partially it.
Yeah, exactly. Because there is so much respect for the kid. You just create an environment and then let the kid lead its own development, and you are kind of a watchful person to help the kid whenever needed. But most of the work is coming from inside rather than outside. And at the end of it, the child becomes an independent human being capable of exploring the world on their own, an independent being. So thank you. Next up is Brian.
So I've been listening and also looking at what's in the chat. And there's been a lot of discussion about the last line and what does that mean, extremes and excess or extravagance and the rest, and trying to puzzle out what those words mean. I think another way to understand what is being talked about here is to say, to avoid the excesses, if I could just use that one word, means to be out of sync with the circumstance or the environment, the surroundings, the situation that one is presented with. And that's the extreme. So it ties in. I'm not really saying anything different or more than what so many others have said, but I'm just saying to try to understand that last line, you can look not just to those words, but you can look back to the whole text. And I think the suggestion is not to be out of sync. So to be like water and and the rest, all the things that people have said. So the only thing I'm adding is that for me to understand that last line, it isn't puzzling out what those three words might mean, but it's reflecting back on the rest of the text.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Elena. Elena, go ahead.
All right. I just thought, based on everyone's input and just the flow of everything, to me, it's every day we go and interact with the world, whether we want it or not. Even if you sit in a room with four walls and windows, you still interact with the world. There is a sound, there is a sense of, you feel some temperature, you hear, you feel, you remember, and it's all ways of interacting. And once we go and start the day and interact with the world, just be aware and be wise how you do it. Just know that. And just take a moment, breathe, and see, am I trying to bend the world my way? Is it too much, perhaps? Must I just step back and observe and see and feel? So that's what came to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Laura, Steve, and Brian. Laura. Laura, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I know. I'm still trying to make sense of this, and I still feel that there's this whole thing about wanting to have independence, growing toward independence, and there's also the point of, you know, growing too far and to extremes and not wanting to go there, and the inappropriateness of it and so forth. And I still feel the message here is very much about that kind of thing. You know, you find yourself in certain spaces and certain times. You have to, you know, look to understand where you are based on where you might have been before, and utilize your experiences to understand and to determine whether you should stay in that space or move on to someplace else. And understand whether you're moving forward or you're moving laterally, and make sure you're not falling behind. And, you know, that the last line makes sense in terms of, you know, don't go to excess in any way, and don't, you know, the issues of, you know, excellence being power and so forth. Again, I just feel like this is a dictate to, you know, the people out there. This is the way you've got to kind of follow your life. You know, this is the order in which everyday life kind of occurs or should occur, to keep it sort of ordinary daily life, but it's also a way that allows you to advance, you know, into other horizons. You know, should you seek them, should you see a way wanting to, you know, you have that opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for me on this one.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
How am I doing with the 2 minutes?
You're doing all right.
Right.
You're doing all right. Thank you. Next up is Steve, followed by Brian. Steve.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm liking what some of the people are saying. Just the whole theme. I think a couple of people, like I think the first one, the gentleman with his wife, was in the video, and then somebody else, and just this whole notion of relativity, right? That any action, right, in a given situation might be bad, wrong, inconsiderate, but in another scenario, it could be good in what actually is needed, you know? And just not to be caught up in, you know, we have sometimes too much political correctness. And the problem with that is then everyone says, well, that behavior is all good and that behavior is all bad, right? And this is what the Tao says too, right? And, you know, specifically sometimes, you know, and again, you know, it says that there is a time to have strength, right? So we don't need to be shy about it. We don't, that's at a, you know, it's like a dance. You see this ballroom dancing, the man and the woman, right? And the woman would actually be disappointed if the man didn't come to ask her to dance and didn't start to lead. And mind you, he's very graceful and she's pushing back on him. And, you know, it's a dance, right? And if it's done properly and you know, relationships with people, you will be trying to figure out what it is the other person needs, which we can't be perfect at that, but you know, it's just that whole back and forth. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with certain behaviors that normally may seem problematic. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Steve. It keeps, you know, all this discussion makes me keep coming back to Amon's point about humility. You know, I think everything here kind of starts with humility, where you're accepting that nature is what it is, and your conception of it is limited. You know, it is what it is right now, but there is more to nature than what you can, even at your best, you can get.
Yes.
And so that's one point, kind of humility, kind of knowing your limits, and realizing this point that you're talking about of dance, that, you know, you're kind of breathing in and breathing out. You're going through these phases. Everything is going through these phases. And the last admonition of avoiding extremes, excesses, and extravagance is, I see it as, don't get locked in to a particular thing too much, up to a point where you start looking inward and not pay attention to what the world is telling you.
Right.
World is engaged in this flow, this dance, and it's an eternal dance. It is sacred, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
And wisdom starts by accepting of that and joining the dance, knowing that you are only a part of this entire dance. And if you suddenly think, you know, if you go, what he's talking about in excess is that if you start, moment you start kind of being too narcissistic or being too focused on what you have to the detriment of noticing the world.
Yeah. Or being too calculating maybe, or too formulaic about it, or, you know, we should just be this way and that way is bad. And instead of just going more with the kind of an instinct of what you feel might be good, you know?
Yes, I mean, I see it as kind of primacy of existence, of saying, you know, nature is what it is. Always that's where you have to be humble in face of that, and not get locked into whatever it is your conceptions are. However good you think you are, if you don't, your conceptions are ultimate. Ultimate code is reality.
And ultimately, you know, and I agree, even though I'm kind of trying to make a case for the other side, it's just to sort of balance out this yin and yang, if we want to call it that way. But ultimately, it just all, it all, what I just, how did I want to say that? I had something there and I lost it anyway. I'm gonna let it go.
That's all right. Thank you. Next up is going to be Brian, Amon, and Joe. Brian.
So I'd like to mention something that came to my mind after I spoke the first time, and it really ties into Jason's translation as opposed to some of the others, and also Amon's comment. There seems to be an assumption in a lot of what we're talking about that we know the situation we're in. That's in fact the assumption I carried into my first comment. And I think in this poem, especially in Jason's comment, or Jason's translation, it's also suggested that we do not even know the situation that we are in. So there is uncertainty, and this dimension of uncertainty is something that also should give us humility. And this last line might be an admonishment, not just against extremes, but another word might be overconfidence, that we really understand the situation we're in.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I remembered what I wanted to say. That's why I'm coming back. And it was that many wise men have said this. And it is that I wanted to say I totally agree with the moderation principle, but they would then go to say sometimes even that, like, so we're going to be moderate in all things, but even in being moderate. So in other words, there can be exceptions, right?
Thank you, Steve. Okay. Next up is going to be Amon, followed by Joe.
Actually, Brian, I wanted to say thank you because you gave me an excellent lead-in, and I actually wanted to say a word more about Jason's translation in particular, because I did hear and did notice that a lot of the other translations became a little more abstract. Even that one I read about the excessive extremism, etc. When he wrote out, the sage avoids extremism in ethics, materials, and politics. I really liked that because there's this neat categorization in the Western philosophical tradition where certain types of schools of thought are under these headers: ethics, political science. If we take materials to be aesthetics, or we could take materials to be metaphysics and epistemology. These are kind of the big schema under which thought is umbrellaed in the Western world. Seeing this breakdown in this chapter of avoiding extremisms in these three omni schools of thought is really sort of echoing what I think Brian was talking about embracing a degree of uncertainty, that humility, that real humility, not a sort of false or arbitrary one, is learning to accept that there is uncertainty and that you are not in control of that, but that you can ride it like a wave. You know, that image of being a wave in the ocean. You're going to go along for this ride one way or another. I didn't want to, when we went back and forth with this chapter, when I saw that, I thought, oh, that's brilliant. And I don't know how intentional or unintentional it was, but I thought it was a great way of sort of drawing at those sacred cows of Western thought and plugging them straight into this chapter, where one of the ongoing themes of the Dao De Jing is an epistemology of uncertainty, this idea that you cannot know. There is no complete and adequate picture that will ever be drawn for you. So we're just hinting at it, try and get more comfortable with that. And as we go chapter by chapter, you see how much easier it is to get more and more comfortable with more degrees of ambiguity in, you know, causes and effects in thought. And I just wanted to say, I thought it was a masterstroke. I don't think I said that when we went back and forth, but it was probably my favorite version of that translation, because those three words are somewhat vague, but this gave it a concreteness that ties it to the whole logic of thought that is at work within the entire text. So that's just my add-on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Great observations. Next up is Joe.
Now, I'm literally just experimenting with this out loud. So I asked for a little leeway, but this idea of humility, I kind of think of what is the opposite of humility? It's pride. That's my thought. So, but wouldn't humility in its truest form be an extreme? In other words, somewhere in between is the balance between pride and humility, so that it would be one extreme or the other. And if it's telling us to balance extremes, it's kind of like where you don't want to be somebody that is, I don't want to say humility is a negative by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a extreme way of being where you're behaving in a way that is maybe lacks a certain amount of self-respect or something along those lines. It's out of balance is what I'm saying, just as a thought. And again, I'm thinking this out in real time. I always take something and think about it in the extremes, and the two extremes, what would be the opposite? Pride. And is there a balance between those two that we actually ought to be seeking instead of just thinking about humility itself? I'm not disagreeing with anybody. I think humility is it's a virtue of sorts, but it's just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I have a comment, and then Amon has a comment, and Evanik has a comment. It's actually a very interesting point. This is, I mean, I think the West and East differ on this point. West always thinks of contradictions, of this opposed to that, and then somehow kind of a compromise. East seems to think of these things in a far more integrated way. Like Yasuhiko talks about breathing in and breathing out. Like breathing in and breathing out seem opposite, but you can't really breathe in without breathing out. And the moment you breathe out, you need to breathe in. So they are kind of contraries. Like a child is very forceful in doing things, yet is very malleable in doing things. And both those kind of go together. They kind of, it's a way of, I don't know how to explain it, but kind of capturing this breathing in and breathing out of two things going naturally from one to the other, instead of saying, okay, how much of this am I going to have? Is that appropriate? It's the dance, I think, is of that kind, as best as I understand it. I'm not, so let's see what Amon and Evanik have to say. Amon.
As soon as Joe, you were talking, I couldn't help but have a thought, and I now feel guilty, Shrikant, because you talk about the difference, and I'm thinking of Nicomachean ethics, the Aristotelian principle of the mean between extremes.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And yeah, but if we start, play with definitions, I think when you're talking about the opposite of humility being pride, I would go further, say the opposite of humility we could even call hubris, and pride being the mean that goes between it. Now, that's as Aristotelian as I actually want to get. But in what you were saying, Shrikant, about this idea of polar complementation between ideas, if you think about humility and hubris as the ebb and flow, and pride as sort of the mean in the space between, then if you take away that sort of value judgment that we think when we talk about prideful people, it's not a bad thing. It's actually, worth in your own accomplishments, not unwarranted or not undeserved or not overinflated. Pridefulness as a characteristic is very anathema to Chinese cultural values. And in no small part because it runs so counter to so much of the teaching of Confucianism. But there is some of that at work here too, about not being so prideful as to allow it to run to hubris. And that's why, again, knowing the audience, thinking of when and who this was talking to, princelings in the warring state, you've got somebody who thinks that they're inheriting the world. You really want to get them, a little more grounded and a little bit less full of themselves. And so I think a warranted sense of pride was sort of treated as, all right, that's acceptable. But you are not, Huangji, you are not the Yellow Emperor. You do not control all under heaven. No matter, even if we give you that title, it's not really the thing you are. So rein it in and have realistic expectations.
Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Amon, what do you think about this idea of, I see this as a major theme of thinking in terms of contraries, is things that flow naturally into each other, like breathing in and breathing out is my favorite example of that.
Yeah.
In yang,
night does not follow. Yeah, day does not follow night. Night and day just turn continuously into one another. That is very even proto-Taoist in its sort of ideas of yin and yang, of the polar complementation and ebb and flow of the world. You see that within the I Ching, the very title, Book of Changes, is about appreciating the flow of phenomena moving one into another. And so there isn't necessarily the extreme of opposition that is as omnipresent in Eastern thought. There is almost always a notion of a harmonious resolution between the two being plausible, being the natural state that things would flow to without horrific intervention. Now, having said that, that didn't stop them from building the Grand Canal, the Great Wall, the Three Gorges Dam, or any number of other interventions and very, very hubristic ventures. But yeah, I do think that that is an easier concept for the East to grasp than it is in the West. Even my favorite example in the Chinese language is the word almost. Zoyo, left, right. Left, right is how you say almost. It is almost because it's kind of left and it's kind of right. They're complementary. It's right in between there, which everything is in between and left, right. So yeah, that's about as good as I got.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up is Evanique, Steve, and Claudio. Evanique.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about when the speakers were talking is when they were talking about humility and hubris, or humility and pride. And I was thinking of confidence. And the reason why I was thinking that is, like, to me, that's the go-between or the middle ground between, because I don't think pride is necessarily bad. I don't think humility is necessarily bad, but I think it can easily be brought to extremes. So it to me, it's like, it's nothing wrong with, if you have humility and you have pride and you put them together, I think you could kind of come out with confidence, because you can have pride in your work and that's never seen as a bad thing. Or you can be you can be humble when you don't know something and you can ask questions, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think when I think of the extremes of humility, I think of people who are trying to show you that they're humble. Like, they're going out of their way to be humble, and it's almost showy. I don't know exactly how to explain it other than to say, in my former church, it was almost like you had to say that you were humble. Like, you had to show humility. You had to show humility to the pastor. You can never ask questions to him. All you could do is kind of like almost praise him and be humble and accept his counseling, even though the minister may not have a degree in counseling. So I think of that, and I think of that's like an extreme form of humility. I think pride, an extreme form of pride, is not getting any advice about anything and thinking that you know everything. But I think there's also positive examples, like you can be humble and know when to ask questions, and you can say with pride, I can help somebody else out with this because I have knowledge in this area. So if you are a counselor and you want to give advice to people to help them, it's okay to have pride in the simple fact, this is what I know because I've studied it, because I've done the work, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's it. That's what I had to say. That was some thoughts that came up as people were talking about this.
Thank you. I want to ask Jason. Jason, what do you think about this point about the dance of kind of breathing in and breathing out on one hand, and the mean between two extremes, the Aristotelian way of thinking. Do you think it is same as the Eastern way, Chinese way, or is it different?
I think they have a subtle difference. Okay, so I always feel Aristotle's the Machiavellian, the middle, the mean is similar to Confucius' mean. Okay, so they talk about avoid the two extremes. But in other way, Confucius also encouraged people to pursue the summum bonum. Okay, the perfect one to Confucius want people to pursue, to stop until the perfection. So some political philosopher will call Confucius as a political perfectionism. Okay, so because they want to be perfect. Okay, but Taoism is a little bit different. I think the Taoism is middle, a little bit vagueness. So you don't want to be so clear. Okay, so just like Armand talk about like. That just remind me, because I use the Chinese words every day, so I lost the original meaning. For Armand said when Chinese say about, okay, also we say left and right, okay, so yeah, that's right. So left and right, in and out, up and down, we constantly use this word to mean the, you know, instead of, you can call it the golden mean. I think it's Aristotle more on the golden mean, and then Taoism more on the vagueness, okay, avoid the extreme. And the Confucius talk about perfect mean, okay. I think that's the best mean on that. I think that's if I had to put it.
Thank you. I want to comment on what Evanik, you said about humility and pride. You know, I'm not thinking of what we have, you know, we've discussed how the sage operates in many poems. And if you look at it, the sage is always open to nature. He has a humility towards nature. And with the humility towards nature, he actually acts. He has confidence to actually act. But that confidence is continuously receiving the feedback from nature. And if the moment the nature says something even slightly contradictory to where he's going, he will change his course. So it is not the kind of humility will say, okay, I can't do anything, or that I'm not able to do anything. Actually, the sage acts, but that even in that action, that humility continues. It's like the feedback loop continuously coming in, and then the action that is there is not like a forceful action of trying to burst through things, but in trying to perceive kind of the natural paths that are open to you and acting along that. And that action is actually quite effective action, capable action, confident action, but that is happening in this context of being open with tremendous continuous humility, even during the action. So it's like, you know, you can see that in the movement of, you know, some of the Tai Chi people or people who do martial arts, that it's a confident action, but it is very responsive action at the same time. So it's kind of it's an odd combination of humility and confidence at the same time. And one, it's the kind of humility that will lead to confidence, and confidence that is built on humility, which is a very different kind of confidence than a narcissistic confidence, which is stealing yourself and kind of stopping the input and trying to ignore the input from reality. Thank you. Next up is going to be Steve, followed by Claudio. Steve.
Yeah, totally agree with what everyone's saying. You, the lady, and the gentleman before. Yep, definitely. You know, you can look at a good example too of like very good athletes, whether it's a Michael Jordan or tennis players or whoever, you know, and they could not be who they are, and part of who they are is they're just filled with a lot of energy, passion. That's who they are, right? But at the same time, they're extremely sensitive to what's going on, what their opponents are doing, what their teammates are doing. And if they didn't have that, they would not achieve what they achieved. So you can't do it in a vacuum. You must be very, very highly attuned to the other people, especially other people, your coaches, what they're telling you, what are they, what are you blind to yourself, what they know. Yeah, it's just a massive amount of, and I would say it's a playful, you were trying to describe what it is. So instead of the narcissist, they're extremely energetic. They're putting all their energy and effort and focus, but at the same time, they're ready to change very quickly if they need to. Actually, Nietzsche has a distinction between Apollonian,
Apollonian.
Not saying it right. Apollon.
Yes, Apollonian. Yeah.
Yes, and the Dionysian. Okay. And again, the one is total instinct, energy, and the other one is rationality. And he actually says straight out that the Dionysian one is that's primary, because if you don't have the energy, that basic instinct, we're human, we can be conscious, we have ethics, animals don't, right? But that's where we're still related to them. So it's like that, he's saying is the primary. And so anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Claudio. Claudio, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking what you said earlier, Shrikant, about the differences between the East and the West and how they deal with opposites. For example, opposites and disagreements, or different values, opposing values or disagreements. The West tends to tends to compromise, or yeah, that's the word you used. I guess it's the same as saying taking the common ground or middle ground, right? And the East, they see the opposites. They see it differently. Like it's like breathing and exhaling. Although they're opposites, they're natural. They're both necessary, right? So it's part of nature, I guess. So trying to put it into context with that poem 29, it says, so things are either lead or follow, whistle or blow, are strong or weak, support or fall. I guess you can add life and death. Those are opposites too. So I guess we should see it that way, as these being natural, these opposites, not taking, I guess, extremes, or not trying to find a compromise. Should we follow the same logic? Should we do like what Joseph said, like be like water, go with the flow, right? Or like you said, martial arts, kung fu, right? Like Tai Chi, not react. Don't be disturbed by it, or don't try to change things. Just let things go smoothly. I don't know. I'm trying to put it into context of the poem.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks. Next up is Amon, followed by Kevin. Amon.
I couldn't let the evening go without this anecdote, because I ran into an old coworker today. I spent 6 years working at a psychiatric hospital, a state-ran psychiatric hospital, and most of the time in the forensics ward with those who were criminally committed. Suffice to say, it was a pretty dangerous place on a pretty regular basis. And in my first couple of years there, I was working this ward with one of these old veterans, a guy named Mel, who was a living treasure. And one night we're sitting watching the day area, and I see him say, oh, there they go. And he takes off his glasses and slowly stands up, sets them down. He's moseying. And that's the only way I could describe it. And I'm looking around trying to see what he saw. And then I see there's a scrap happening out on the balcony with two of the patients. So I leap up and I run over there, and I get to him right as he's fumbling with his keys for the door. And I push him out of the way. I open the door, I go in, I break it up, and I take him. And afterwards he looks at me and says, sometimes you need to learn when to have a slow code. I said, I'm sorry, a what? And he said, 2 more minutes and those boys would have been begging for somebody to come rescue them. And then all you got to do is come lead them to their corners. You did it the hard way. That was one of those teaching moments where I thought, oh, that's what 30 years of veteran experience actually does. And that's the difference between not even a humility of affect or of false or impressed, but he was there for 30 years. He didn't want to fight with 2 young, healthy young men. He knew he would get hurt, but 30 more seconds, a minute, their energy would be spent and it would have been a much easier afternoon. So I had to share that anecdote as a concrete example of real humility and effectiveness versus, affected humility or affected hubris or pride. That's what 30 years in that field would do for you. I have to go too, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to share that anecdote with everyone.
Thank you.
I hope y'all, I hope I get to see you all again next week. Chapter 30 is probably one of my favorites. Happy Autumn Festival all.
Thank you, Amon. Fantastic.
Eat some round food.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Amon. I just love this example, because what it is that being alive to nature, working with nature's rhythms. Nature has a way of expending energy in some way. You work with it, you become aware of it, and you act in accordance with that, instead of having a goal which is divorced from nature, which is just coming from your consciousness, and trying to push through this situation. You're likely to get hurt, you're likely to hurt everybody, and you're going to cause a mess, even if the aim is correct of what you're trying to do, because you do not have the humility of actually listening to how the nature works and how things work, you do damage. So that's a fantastic example by Amon. I want to tell you about a very challenging thing that I've been trying to do on Mondays. On Mondays, I am just floored by the quality of discussion in these Dao De Jing meetups. We are doing a good job of getting a piece of the East and trying to build our sensibilities. It's a very delicate thing to build a sensibility, and that's what we are doing, slowly, step by step, week after week, reading after reading, thinking after, thinking in our own ways, writing, all of that we are doing. And what I wanted to do is I also wanted to put West side by side, because I don't want to lose the West. West has its strengths. West has its weaknesses, but West has its strengths. Don't want to lose that. So I've been trying to do this on Monday. So Monday was to encapsulate the West. Now that's much harder problem, because we are more familiar with the West. I started with Nietzsche as a good example, as one of the great thinkers in the West, but there is a lot more to West than Nietzsche. And I think I have found something which actually meets the bill, okay? Now, Charlie captured it best. I think a couple of meetups ago, I don't know which meetup it was, but he said that the West is yang. It is extroverted, focused on the outer. It uses language, explicit thinking, and it tries to transform and dominate the world. Tries to transform the world. As opposed to that, East is yin. it is more introverted. It is more intuitive as opposed to explicit. And it tries to accept nature. So if I want to pick something that epitomizes the West, it has to have those qualities, essentially of transforming the world, transforming things. But we are not really talking about West for West's own sake. What we are trying to do is that we are trying to connect the West and the East. We want the part of the West that builds on the strengths of the West, its ability to be more explicit. We've got science and technology as a result of that. That has transformed our worlds. We are able to do this because of, we are able to talk to each other because of that. We have incredible amount of prosperity, incredibly long lives. All of us otherwise would be dead by now. So there is tremendous value that is created by the West. At the same time, there are values from the East, if integrated fully with the West, will produce something even more magnificent. The biggest thinker I have seen on this, who has actually does this, which combines the intuitive with the explicit, reason with emotion, individual with community, is Louis Sullivan. But his presentation is actually a very Eastern presentation. It is very much intuitive, flowery, metaphoric kind of presentation. But I found another thinker, thanks to CJ from Thinking Society. And that is, there is a book called The Design Way by Harold Nelson, which does a spectacular job of showing what design is, how it needs to speak to your soul. He talks about ensouled design, okay? That is equivalent of Louis Sullivan saying form follows function. It is very explicit. He lays out all the issues far better than I have seen anybody do. Besides, it actually speaks to me very well. I am almost 80% of the book done in the last 3 days. Okay, I've never read a book that complex this fast. Okay, so it is because it is using many of the ideas that we've been discussing between yin and yang, that how the design needs to be like that, between this marriage between intuition and reason. He talks about the flow state all the time that we've been talking about. He talks about this order and chaos. So it's very much connected with all, whether we're looking at the Jordan Peterson ideas or Louis Sullivan ideas or Dao De Jing ideas, it's all connected. It brings all of that in. And it is something spectacular. So I'm going to use that as a representative of the West, and I'm going to do this on Mondays. Now, the great thing is that I actually found out about this because I interviewed CJ, and he, in a short interview of about 1.5 hours, he held up the book 4 times. And I said, wait a minute, I thought, CJ and Buckminster Fuller was the base of his thought, but looks like this book is influential. Let me look and see what it is. So that's one thing. Second thing is CJ has done more than 25 meetups on this book for the Thinking Society. So we can leverage a lot of that. Further, Harold Nelson is just simply brilliant. I found a 30-minute video where he explains the concept of design, okay? It's a very profound concept. If you just get this concept, after all, if you do listen to, if you participate in 10 meetups and get just this concept of design, that will be well worth it. Because what design is taking in everything that you know from your senses and memory, organizing it with your conceptual faculty, keeping in mind your spirit, your purpose, projecting the future, and building something, planning something, building something that makes your future actually better. And do this on a massive scale. And that's what human beings do. So I'm calling it, I'm titling the meetups, you are a designing animal. I think rational animal doesn't do justice to man because it focuses on one aspect of man and doesn't even look at the consequences of it. Designing animal, I think, captures human being. And that goes to everything we are learning from Ascent of Man by Jacob Banowski about the role of the hand, role of planning. All of that is integrated. So most of our meetups will get integrated, by this. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm inviting anybody who wants. Maritza and Joe have already agreed to participate actively. And I want to extend this invitation to anybody who has, especially the folks from the Thinking Society who have participated and watched CJ's meetups on this, to join us in exploring this book. We're going to start slow. Next meetup is going to be overview. So all you need to do, I did a 13-minute video summarizing what I'm trying to do with these meetups. I'll also take this section and present it there so people understand what we are trying to do. Because what I want to do is I want to design our way of exploring design. Okay, I want to see how much can be accomplished because there are some really great people here. How do you leverage the creativity of people? Joe is familiar with everything CJ has said, so he's going to be able to pull everything. Maritza has been studying Louis Sullivan. She's going to be able to make connections between Louis Sullivan and the design way. There are other people who will have their own take. So I'm inviting people to come up with their own take on this, and we will figure out a way of working together as co-panelists, as participants, and really mastering this idea of design together. So it's going to be a project. It's not going to be meetups. It's basically these meetups are going to be this design project. I'm trying to look for a name, and again, I'm open to suggestions. And let's do this. So I want to invite anybody if you have any thoughts. I don't know if Maritza or Joe want to say anything brief about the design way, or anybody else wants to say anything about this. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Joe, go ahead.
So it's interesting because in what I've read about design up till this point, I think Louis Sullivan does bring in metaphysics as well, but this is a book that's very explicit about bringing in metaphysics in a way that is like into the design process. So that's something a little bit more unique. So I think things like, and I'll be interested to see how form follows function actually fits in with the design way. I think there's going to be a lot of crossover there.
Can I give you a short answer?
Oh yeah, please. That's actually I was trying to. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, what Louis Sullivan does is that he's grasping the same thing in a poetic way, in a metaphorical way. He's capturing very deep issues, often much deeper than what Harold Nelson is doing, but he's doing it in a way in which Lao Tzu does. He says, be like water. So be like water is a metaphysical statement. It is a very deep statement, but it is metaphorical. It is suggestive. It is very deeply suggestive. That's how Louis Sullivan is, as opposed to somebody like Harold Nelson, he's trying to do the same thing. His explicitness is much, much higher than Louis Sullivan. But the grandeur of what Louis Sullivan is doing is larger. But both of them are trying to do about the same thing. So it's a very good juxtaposition. And because I have kind of spent years on Louis Sullivan, I'm going to be able to do, I'm going to be able to bring some of that, but I'm trying to understand him on his own terms. But ultimately, what we are all trying to do is not really trying to study Louis Sullivan or Harold Nelson. We are trying to form our own conception of what does it mean to design? What does it mean for us? What designs do we live in? You know, he gives this great example of fish talking about water. So that's one of my favorites, you know, like two fish are saying, what is this thing called water? Because if you're living in water, you don't notice it. We live in designs. We live in culture. It's all around us. Words we are using is part of cultures. The way we are moving is picked up from the culture. A lot of it is culture. It makes you aware of it. It makes you self-conscious about it, and we can take it to a new level. So it's going to be Brian followed by Maritza. Brian.
I'll just, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I'll just throw out there, when I was teaching, one of the things I looked at was the Stanford School of Design, the Stanford D School model. It's very similar to what you all are talking about. Here's the purpose, the mission statement of the Stanford D School. The Stanford D School is a place where people use design to develop their own creative potential. So I don't know how much that ties in with what you're thinking, Shrikant, but.
Brian, I'm going to invite you to come and participate and talk about the Stanford model and compare that approach to approach of Harold Nelson. That would be a great way of, because, you know, we're looking at the idea of design, and we'll take all the ideas. We'll use this Harold Nelson as a core, and I'm happy to bring in things like that. So especially because you have taught it, you know it very well, please, you know, participate actively, and let's see what we can do. Maritza.
So to me, I'm really excited about looking at the connection of the design way with Louis Sullivan. So the what I view it as design here by Nelson is introduced to us as a kind of an organic way of viewing systems based thinking, right? So like design is an intentional change that we're looking to use. And it's like for the purpose of creating, and it lies kind of at the base. Like it's a foundational approach. And what Nelson points out is that we don't even realize that it's there. Like we don't even see it. So, you know, as Shrikant was talking about, you know, the fish wondering what the heck is water, because it's all around you and it's everywhere. And you cannot take a breath almost without some aspect of design shaping your next moment. And what Nelson is saying, well, why are we allowing it to just happen? Let's kind of plot to shape it. And what I like about that, and the reason I use the word organic, is it's this thing that we have been looking at with this community, with you, Shrikant, with so many of you here today. Many of you have heard me say before, you know, let's find that meaningful path. Let's walk with purpose to find our meaning. And this here is telling us, I have a blueprint where we're going to find this path. And so that's really enticing. So I will say that I have been aware of, CJ's ideas on the design way, and I have never before purchased the book. So you have Shrikant to thank for that. I have in the past relied on CJ's notes and CJ's website, plus one or two others and videos to learn a little bit about the design way. But now I'm looking forward to delving into the book with the rest of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marisa. Next up is going to be Mike, Charlie, and Joe. Mike.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the work at all, but I have a brother who's been in manufacturing and designing things for about 5 decades. And I could learn a lot from him in terms of how things were designed and produced in the 50s and 60s, so much by hand. And then as we've gotten into modern times, how computers have changed so much of the design process. I don't know if that contribution would fit in what the book is.
It would be fantastic, because what happens is that the big point that Harold Nelson is making about design is that design is an embodied activity. There is the skill of design is you cannot just do it. I suppose it's like being, he says, it's like being a connoisseur. Can't be a connoisseur of wine without actually tasting the wine. It is in the process of perfecting this entire loop, going back to kind of conceptualizing it, doing it, seeing the feedback of it, that design is done. So it is really very close to, it is about understanding what is behind this great artisanal process on one hand. Secondly, it takes one step higher of saying that it's not enough just to produce this one great thing. What you have to understand, what kind of things you have to do in order to do that again and again and again, not only with this particular thing, but with every aspect of your life. So it is taking that in, it is looking at design in this very profound way. And then it will also be able to ask question, what of this can be done by a computer and what of it cannot be done by a computer? There are limits to that, because design involves all of our faculties. It involves our intuition. It involves our senses. It involves our reason. And it is, he says it's the dance between the real, the true, and the ideal. Most people, when they think about mechanical things, today's culture, they just look at true or effective. They don't look at what is real, what is actually there. And they don't look at the ideal. And without those parameters, you cannot design a future, because you have to answer the question, where do you want to go? Where do you need to go? Where do you want to go? And another point, deep point he makes is that of service, that it's not just a person's feeling about, I feel this. Design is actually done externally. Most of the design is externally, and the consumers, people who are using the design, the stakeholders, are other people. So it has to be objectively good. So how do you build all of these goodnesses, excellences, not only all levels of that speak to all levels of your being, but also speak to community and how we can work together and build each other's designs up as a result. So absolutely, it is truly stunning, Mike. And I think you're going to love it. Wonderful. Next up is Charlie, followed by Joe. Charlie.
Yeah, this brings up to my mind a metaphor that I love to use almost compulsively, and that's jazz musicians. And because they kind of capture this whole thing, because in the process of creating something, it's like a real-time design. But there's for one of the things that I've heard many people say is half of winning is showing up. Okay, and so you have to engage. Okay, you have to be there and do it. Okay, and so in the process you gain chops, like Aman was saying about that person who worked in the mental hospital. You know, he knew to walk slow, and so it's this whole idea of living life artfully is it's engagement, full engagement, realizing that there are skills that are worth acquiring. And this is the part I'm working on myself right now, and then having this the imagination and the intuition to know where to take that urge. You know, one of my favorite quotes is from John Keats, that truth is beauty and beauty is truth, and so to me that's a big hint, okay, about where to go, and so to me it's just living is an art form, and it's kind of like, you know, in the Christian Bible, they say, by your works you will be known. You know, so that you know, how you live your life is important, and living well is like, you know, creating beauty. You know, not just for yourself, but, you know, to help bring about a community of that is able to participate in that creation process.
Beautiful, beautifully put. I would add one thing to it. You know, when I studied the great ideas, there are three concepts that always go together: truth, beauty, and goodness. And those are intimately tied, and they build on one another. And this is what is unique about this book. Harold Nelson actually deals with those issues as central design principles, that you can't really have a good design without it being real, without it being true, and without it being ideal. You need to have all of that. And if you have all of that, you produce the beauty and then you experience it as beauty, because he uses this concept of ensouled design. That means it has soul. It's the creator who actually made that has put his soul in there. He has responded and evaluated every aspect of it to make it tied to reality, very real, true, not contrary with anything, ideal. And it speaks not only to them, but because he has done it out there in the open, in an honest way, it also speaks to the other. And what that does is that it actually adds to the energy of others at every level. You know, Louis Sullivan is very big in that, saying that a place not only has to be functional, it's not enough for something to be efficient. It should make you feel as it should make you feel. Any particular room, if you're trying to design it, it's not just that it is effective in doing, but you should feel a certain way in that room. That is very real. And all of that is built in. Steve, you had a point.
It was just a question. Does he acknowledge any debt to Plato with the truth, beauty, goodness, or?
The truth, beauty, goodness, I'm talking about a much more kind of a general principle that I'm saying.
Because that still is basically Platonic too, right? I mean,
there is a version of it, which is Platonic, and there is a version of it, which is Aristotelian or Aquinas. So let me try to answer this. Okay, let me try to answer it. It's a very beautiful question. Let me try to answer it. This is very, let me see how to put it. Okay, this is a very deep issue. Okay, it goes to the heart of a key point, key difference, key battle of ideas across the Western civilization. People think of it as Aristotle versus Plato. The Aristotelian approach basically loves the world, starts with the world, tries to induce things from it, and uses whatever is induced in order to shape ideas, then form evaluations, and do action. And it remains open to the results of the action. So there is this continuous loop going on. Right. It worships the world. It says, I am trying to live in this world. And everything else I'm doing, like the ideas I'm forming, are based, are in service of that. So there is this loop going on between the person. There is a meetup that we did on the cogitative sense of Thomas Aquinas, who captures this point most brilliantly. So if you go to the YouTube 52 Living Ideas, search for Aquinas, that's the basic idea. Now the truth, beauty, and goodness over here. So, and the thing that is missing, I would add real. So you are trying to be open to nature and what nature is. That is critical part of it. So it's very much Taoist, this approach of taking nature as given, but it adds to it of saying that names, I am going to try to name because name is the father of 10,000 things. I want to make 10,000 things in order to make life better. But I know that these are names and I know that these are things. This is not the Tao. So I will remain open to corrective mechanisms to continuously keep improving it. That is the Aristotelian approach. Platonic approach is different from that. It privileges it sets up this dichotomy between the world, which it considers not particularly important, and it privileges the ideas that are there. So I don't want to go deep into this discussion, but all I will say here is that Harold Nelson, Louis Sullivan, Akoff, Buckminster Fuller are all Aristotelian in this sense of the word. They love this world. They love life. They want to make it better. And they use ideas as tools in this loop in order to make it better, which is very different from the Platonic tradition. So that's a short answer to that.
Don't worry, I'm not that.
I don't want to distract it from the main point.
I was just trying to draw a connection. That is all it was.
Absolutely, no, I understand, Steve.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make it clear, not for your sake, but for sake of other people. But I do not want to get distracted by from the purpose. The purpose, what I'm saying is, this is the book that I think has done a spectacular job of bringing all of these things together. And that would be a worthy meetup to put side by side with Dao De Jing. And so I'm going to do this on Mondays, starting the coming Monday. I'm going to, there is a 30-minute video. So firstly, I encourage you to go ahead and acquire the book and start reading it. I'm going to try to give like a book. I'm about 80% of the way through the book. I'm going to finish it in the next couple of days. I'm going to discuss it with a whole bunch of people. I'll keep on updating the web page, the meetup page. But what I want to do is I want to invite everybody to contribute as much as possible. I do not know offhand. I've designed only 2 meetups so far on this. The first one is going to be just that 30-minute video and the concept of design. That's all we are going to focus on. What is design? And why is man a designing animal? And what is the role of design in life? That is all we're going to be looking at. Because if we get that, we have a good thing. Next, I'm taking help of Maritza, who's been working on this for some time. We are going to come up with a constellation of key concepts in the book. So what I'm doing is that, okay, I have to tell you this. I asked CJ's advice and he says, it's very easy. You just need to do 200 meetups to make this happen. I don't want to do 200 meetups. I don't want to wait that long. Okay. I always believe in the spiral loop of doing things at certain levels and then kind of trying to map out the whole thing and delivering values at every stage. So it's a far more, so that's the kind of process I have. So I'm going to start with concept of design. Then I'm going to identify, and I'm again inviting everybody to contribute to that. So the key question for the second meetup is going to be, what are the key ideas of Harold Nelson in the design way? If you had to just identify ideas, and we're just going to discuss those ideas, I'm hoping to get it down to maybe about somewhere between 10, not more than 20, probably somewhere between 6 to 12 ideas is what I'm hoping to get it down to. It doesn't have to cover the book comprehensively, but it has to cover the entire skeleton, entire core of the book. And then we are going to just understand those ideas. That'll be the second meetup. And then soon we will actually go into the book, perhaps chapter by chapter. So I'm looking forward to, how, and I will keep talking to folks to figure out how to do that. But that's the plan, folks. All right. Thank you so much. And it's always an honor to have so many people, so many great people here. And I will see you folks soon. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.